Thank you, voice from the sky. Good afternoon. My name is Justin Schmitz. I represent the City of Lone Tree in Douglas County, and I'm the Vice Chair of the DRCOG Transportation Advisory Committee. I call to order the December 16th, 2024 DRCOG TAC meeting at 1:30 p.m. This is an in-person and live stream meeting format. Members of the public attending by Zoom have the ability to mute and unmute themselves as well as share their webcam. For those attending online, please make sure you typed your name and it reflects your first and last name and who you represent. We ask those attending to speak up, to use the raised hand button to ask a question or comment on an agenda item. If you have any technical questions, you can direct those to staff in the chat box. As a reminder to members and alternates here in person, please press the unmute button on the bottom of your mic stand. Make sure the light on your microphone is on when you speak, and be prepared to speak and speak directly into the microphone so your voice will amplify. Please announce your name as well as representation when asking a question or making a comment for the record so that Cam doesn't have to guess. And then during the business agenda, TAC members and alternates can speak or ask questions. Members of the public may speak during public comment. DRCOG is sending around a sign-in sheet. Please make sure to sign in. And at this time, I would like to ask TAC members and alternates to introduce themselves in person. And I will, which way? Carson. All right, Carson's going to start us.
Always me. Carson Priest, TDM Special Interest Seat.
Jordy Ayers, Aviation Special Interest Seat.
Arius Pockbuzz, CDOT Division of Transportation Development.
Maria DeAndre, City of Wheat Ridge.
Zeke Lynch, Douglas County.
Jefferson County, Chris Milling.
Jefferson County and Lakewood.
Jeff Dankenbring, Arapahoe County, City of Centennial.
Matt Callison, Arapahoe County, City of Aurora.
Wally Wirtz, Freight Special Interest.
Kent Mormon, Adams County, City of Thornton.
Michelle Riccio, Adams County. Michelle Malinakis, Boulder County.
Jeff Boyd, Housing Special Interest.
Brent Soderlund, Arapahoe County and City of Littleton.
Jenna Hahn, Adams County and City of Commerce City.
Cam Kennedy, DRCOG staff.
Justin Schmitz, City of Lone Tree, Douglas County.
Jacob Rieger, DRCOG staff.
John Pepsdorf, DRCOG. Carson, it doesn't matter where you sit, we'll find you and start with you every time.
Jessica Mickelbust, Colorado Department of Transportation. Jennifer Bartlett, City and County of Denver. Kira Ruman-Moore, Regional Air Quality Council.
Chris Quinn with RTD.
Jean Sampson, City of Boulder.
David Kretzinger, City and County of Denver.
Alex Hadright, Boulder County.
Larry Simmons, Older Adult Special Interest Seat.
Jonathan Webster, City and County of Denver.
Carolyn Clam, DRCOG staff.
Okay, thank you. I believe that was everybody in the room. We will now move on. I don't believe we have any announcements today, so we will move on to our public comment. We will now open the meeting for public comment. Please remember, public comment is limited to 3 minutes. If you have joined by Zoom, please raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button, and we will call on you to begin speaking. If you joined by phone, please raise your virtual hand by pressing *9, and we will call on you by the last 3 digits of your phone number. Staff will unmute you, and then you will need to unmute yourself by pressing *6 on your phone. You have 3 minutes to speak, after which we will ask you to wrap up, and your line will be muted. As a reminder, after the public comment period, only TAC members and alternates will partake in the discussion regarding each agenda item. We'll now open it to public comment. Do we have any public comment in the room? Seeing none, do we have any online?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not see any hands raised.
All right, we'll give it one more second. Still no hands. We will close public comment, and we will move on with our meeting. At this time, we will move on to the November 18th, 2024 TAC meeting summary. This was attachment A in your packet. Is there any discussion, corrections, or questions regarding the November 18th, 2024 TAC meeting minutes? All right. Seeing no one excited to modify that, we will move on, and they stand approved, and we'll move on to the next item. And today, we have no action items on the agenda, so we will move into just discussion items for the day. And we will get started here with item number 4. This was attachment B in your packet, the Community Clean Transportation Assistance Program. And Jake Reiger, the Multimodal Transportation Planning Manager, will be introducing this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So at last month's TAC meeting, we handed out some information about this. We verbalized it a little bit, and we said we'd come back in December and actually give a presentation on it. So my job is to see if I can get the acronym right and then introduce our speaker. So this is the Non-Attainment Area Pollution Mitigation Enterprise Community Clean Transportation Assistance Program. Hopefully, Darius, did I get it right? Okay, all right, I passed. So with that, I would like to introduce Darius Pakbaz, who is the Director of CDOT's Transportation, Division of Transportation Development. See if I got that right, to talk about this topic. And Darius, thank you.
Development here at CDOT. I'm also the program administrator for the non-attainment enterprise, otherwise known as NATME, which Jacob did get the acronym correct. And the non-attainment enterprise, just to give a quick bit of background, was established in late 2022, 2023 as part of Senate Bill 260. I think I can go up on here. Oh, this is just the memo. Are we able to bring up the presentation? So it was developed as part of the 260 legislation. In that time, the enterprise has been collecting the fee, developing, had some public outreach that was done in 2023 in developing its programs. And this is the first program that was, oh, perfect, thank you.
Sorry about that.
And so this is the first program that's out and available. The applications are open for now until about April, and wanted to give us some quick overview and answer any questions members of the TAC have. So a little bit of background on the non-attainment enterprise. I've already kind of explained that, but basically the enterprise can fund projects through grants that for projects that reduce single occupancy vehicle travel, reduce the environmental impacts of transportation, and support neighborhood connectivity in the non-attainment area, which currently is in the the dark blue box area. So all of the counties within DRCOG, with the exception of Clear Creek and Gilpin County, most of Larimer County and Weld County as well. So currently this is open to Metro Denver, North Front Range, and the Upper Front Range if we're looking at the transportation boundaries. This grant program is making $17 million available, and I touched it, so therefore it went blank. $17 million available in this call for projects. There we go. All right. So the notice of funding opportunity that went out on November 4th, I believe, and we're keeping it open for about 6 months. And generally, this can fund projects that are related to the funding focus areas within the enterprise, which includes sustainably reduce traffic congestion, reduce the environmental and health impacts of transportation, or improve neighborhood connectivity, with some examples on there. Alternatively, if you are familiar with the CMAQ program, anything that is eligible to receive CMAQ funds, any type of projects that receive those funds, is also eligible for this grant program as well. The project awards can vary from $500,000 all the way up to $17 million, if the project is good enough. I don't anticipate there'll be one grant for $17 million, but there is no maximum award for it. There is a minimum of $500,000. This slide here goes through some of the eligibility criteria that was established by the Board of Directors for the non-attainment enterprise, which include meeting the sponsor criteria under statute. So generally, if your organization or your government is eligible to receive CMAQ funds, you're eligible to receive funds from this program and to apply for this grant. Also, one of the requirements is to ensure that you're in good standing with the Colorado Secretary of State, you're not on the federal inactive list, and don't have any subrecipient outstanding audit findings. Demonstrate that the project can reduce ozone emissions. The program is relying on the CMAQ suite of tools, which are the best available in order to determine that. The proposed project goes through a review through a licensed professional engineer, either with your organization, or if there's assistance needed, you can contact the enterprise if that's not available. But as long as that's signed off by a licensed engineer that the project is feasible, that meets that requirement. A 20% match with the ability to get a hardship waiver if written to the Board of Directors, and that the infrastructure project's open to the public and follows all federal and state and local rules and regulations. These are the evaluation criteria that the Board of Directors will be taking a look at in terms of how they will award the grants and how they will score the grants, which includes the potential ozone reduction benefits, the support and outreach and economic benefits to disproportionately impacted communities, whether the project meets the business purpose and the three funding focus areas from the previous slide, is prioritized in a transportation improvement plan, which could be either from the state's improvement plan, a regional improvement plan like DRCOG's MetroVision, or a city county's transportation plan. Demonstrate a likelihood of project delivery, improves the safety of the traveling public, in particular vulnerable road users, demonstrates the expansion of transportation choice or neighborhood connectivity, and of course the quality of the application. This is the timeline. So as I had mentioned earlier, the notice of funding opportunity opened on November 4th. That will be open until the final deadline on April, the last day of April 30th of 2025. Alternatively, if sponsors would like assistance with a review, we're asking for that a month or two early to allow us to solicit support in order to do that review. But the ultimate deadline is April 30th, and we expect between April 30th and July 1st that the board will make decisions in regards to the awards, and award notices will be sent out July 1st. After that, we'll begin the fund process of getting the funds into your hands or working out intergovernmental grant agreements. Excuse me, I said July 1st, I meant July 31st, so my apologies there. This is some of the outreach that we have done so far, with more to come, which include meetings at technical advisory committees like the DRCOG's one. We've also been to North Front Range. We've also been to the Upper Front Range Transportation Planning Region. There is a press release out there that is available on our on the NAPME website, as also, I believe, in this presentation. Additionally, we'll be sending out kind of an email blast to local government, cities and counties in the non-attainment area later on this month. We also have materials in Spanish for those who would prefer materials in Spanish. Those are available, including the application. Anticipate at least one webinar in around January to answer questions. And we'll have a FAQ on the enterprises page, which will update with questions that we get at if we had mistakenly forgotten to put that on the website or in the NOFO. So as we get those in, we'll make those available. Additionally, the enterprise is available for questions as well. On the last slide here, we have our contact information. I believe that is it. So that's our website, and that's the email address that goes to the enterprise and the enterprise staff to answer questions regarding this. We expect, since This is the first grant opportunity. Our email box is going to be getting a little bit more use on there, but happy to answer any questions as they come in. Additionally, if you have any questions today, I'm happy to answer those as well. And hopefully we'll be able to work with your communities to get out some funds to help with neighborhood connectivity and clean transportation. Thank you.
Thank you very much to CDOT for that presentation. I'm glad Jacob read that name. We're all going to get used to it, though, as we get ready to start applying for these exciting grants. So thank you. Do we have any questions from TAC members? Yes.
One quick question. When would funds need to be used by if awarded?
It's an interesting question. In statute, there is no statutory limit. The enterprise unless the legislature makes any type of changes to the statute, there is no limit on that. We being the enterprise are required to have a publicly available dashboard. So while we don't want to make it so onerous, like you only have 1 year to spend the funds, we'll probably take a look at a reasonable time frame within the intergovernmental agreement. But right now, there's no hard deadline.
Thank you, Christina. I had the same question myself. Other questions? Yes. Jennifer Bartlett.
Thank you. Jennifer Bartlett, City, County of Denver. When would match need to be available? Is that at this time of IGA signing or?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
If that changes, we'll let you know and we'll put that in the FAQs, but generally it would need to be available.
Other questions? Yes. Michelle.
Thanks. Michelle Riccio, Adams County. Is there any guidance on eligible projects for construction versus pre-construction? Are they both eligible?
Generally, yes. In the application packet and the instructions, there is a link to the quite extensive CMAQ guidance, which will go through each of the different project types and what is eligible.
Follow up. Alex
Federate, Boulder County. Are past programs or fare box buy-ups eligible?
I believe so. However, I'd have to check to see on the in the guidance whether it is specifically, but I believe so. Maybe I can grab your card and get back to you to get a affirmative answer. Generally, if within statute, which I believe is 43-4-1302, it states that if a sponsor in a project is eligible for CMAQ funds, it is eligible or has the ability to show a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So that generally tends to mean that I would say yes, but happy to get a definitive answer for you offline.
One more unrelated question. Do you have any sense of what the cadence of NOFOs will be in future years?
I don't. The enterprise is allocating funds for this type of program on an annual basis. However, those funds aren't large enough to do a NOFO on an annual basis. So I'm suspecting every other year, every 3 years probably. Usually these funds come in, I think around $4 million a year. That's not a lot to give out on an annual basis. This year this is all of the funds the enterprise has collected since its inception. I wouldn't expect this type of NOFO to be out this time next year, to answer your question.
Thank you very much. I believe Jean's answering a question.
Thank you, Darius, for the presentation. It's exciting to see these dollars starting to roll out. Question, I believe there's another NOFO related to NATME coming out later this year, perhaps this summer for larger projects, perhaps BRT projects. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
That has been in discussions with the board of directors. Unfortunately, not a lot of decisions have been made on it other than some planning totals. It is designed to be bus rapid transit focused within the non-attainment area, so within the Denver region and the upper Front Range, North Front Range region. I would suspect there will be more information out later throughout the first part of 2025 as the board makes decisions, but nothing definitive at this time.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Maria.
Yeah, how are you defining the disproportionately affected communities? Is that going by the DRCOG's website or is that some other map somewhere?
Excellent question. That is determined within Colorado state statute, and I believe it's Appendix B within the NOFO has instructions on how to use EnviroScreen, the state's tool, so that way you're able to answer the questions that are in the application.
Other questions? Dr. Cox? On.
Darius, just maybe a couple of questions on new provision in this NOFO related to the federal inactive projects list. Will you be publishing that list for local governments so that they're aware? We're having trouble tracking down that list.
Absolutely. We anticipate having that up before Christmas time along with our NOFOs, in addition to the sub-recipient findings list. So it will make it easier on local governments to see whether they're on that list and to see if there's any issues with the eligibility. Absolutely.
And I assume that for eligibility, there will be an opportunity for a cure period for any jurisdictions that might find themselves on either of those lists.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, the cure period would be with the federal government or the agency that you have the inactive project list. But yes, we will make provisions with that, and when we have more information regarding that process, we'll make it available on the website.
In terms of the match provision, I'm assuming since these are state funds through the enterprise, that federal funds can be used as the.
Yes, as long as it's not matching enterprise to enterprise funds. So there is no provision within statute that limits that.
This is my last question for now. Darius, you're going to treat these as a reimbursement grant, so you're not going to give the money. It's going to be the local jurisdiction, the sponsoring agency will expend funds, submit an invoice to CDOT, and get reimbursed.
Correct. It will be a reimbursement grant. Correct.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Reiger?
Sorry, Darius, even more questions from DRCOG staff. First, just to clarify for those here and those listening, when you mention a project being an improvement program, because we're so used to talking about the transportation improvement program, I want to clarify, it's not so much that a project needs to be in our TIP. It needs to be either in our 2050 regional transportation plan, one of our other plans, or a local government plan. Is that correct?
Correct, and it is not an eligibility criteria, so it can be outside the plan. It's just from a evaluation. The board will evaluate applications that are already in approved plans, but you're correct.
Okay. Next question is just to clarify on the application timeline, February 25th, that's the deadline to submit. If you want technical review of your application, you don't have to have that, correct? So you could wait and just submit on April 30th.
Correct. If your organization already has the expertise to do a technical review of your project and is able to be signed off by a licensed professional engineer with the state of Colorado, correct. You do not need to submit anything on February 25th. We'll be sure to clarify that in the facts, but thank you for that question.
And if an applicant wants to submit an application for technical review and get some feedback on February 25th, does the application have to be as complete as possible, or can it just be a partial application, particularly obviously the portion that the applicant would maybe want some feedback on, knowing that the rest of it will come by April 30th?
It can be partial, yes.
Okay. And then one more question from me on the match. For our local governments or other applicants who may be wondering, is an in-kind match allowed, staff time? What are sort of the flavors of match that can count?
There is nothing within statute that limits the in-kind match. There is just a match percentage of 20%, so there is no limit on that other than you cannot match this enterprises fund with the grant. So if there is anything more strict, we'll be sure to put it in the facts, but nothing that I'm aware of that right now. If a entity wants to have a match reduction or a match elimination, they will have to write a letter to the board of directors indicating their hardship, and the board of directors will make that determination.
Okay. Is there guidance, that was my last question about the hardship waiver, is there guidance in the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, for how to do a potential hardship waiver and when that decision would be made vis-a-vis the grant, the application deadline?
I believe it touches on it, but we can get a little bit more specific if necessary, if there's specific questions. But generally, a letter to the Board of Directors, which outlines the hardship, should be sufficient, and the Board of Directors at one of its monthly meetings will take that into consideration and make a determination.
Okay, thank you, sir, appreciate it.
I'm going to pass it back to Ron for one more question.
Now I have a follow-up, but I'm sorry, Darius. This feels a little bit like an inquisition. Certainly don't mean it that way. Just, it's a really important program. I know there's going to be a high level of interest, so trying to get some clarity for all of our partners out there on this.
Absolutely.
So related to the plan and the presence of the project in the plan, I think many of these projects are likely not to be sort of regional or quality projects. If one was, though, I think it would be helpful if there was some opportunity for us to work with you and during a review, because I'd hate for local government to prepare an application for, say, a bus rapid transit project that's not currently in the regional transportation plan, and then for CDOT to award funds to it that would rely on its implementation to be amended in the plan, which is a whole different process and we're not prepared to do. So there is a little bit of a nuance in terms of, it might be identified in a local agency's long-range transportation plan, but for a regionally significant project, if it's not in the regional transportation plan, that would present some barriers to be.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, absolutely. And I appreciate all the questions, because that allows us to get some of our, get this information out here and make sure that we have it correct. I think what the Board of Directors wanted to do, they didn't want to make it so specific where it eliminates anybody, but generally from a valuation criteria, if it's even in the local plan, I think that's important, because that demonstrates likelihood of success, even if it's not in, like, for example, the DRCOG's plan or the state's 10-year plan. So even there, but if there are questions around that, we're happy to, staff's happy to provide assistance.
Thank you for that. Do we have any additional comments, kind of following up on DRCOG comments? Yes, Alex.
I think a couple of questions ago, you said that if you're not submitting for the February 25th draft review deadline, that you would need to have the capability to do your own professional engineering review prior to the April deadline.
Yes.
Is that just for projects that are construction or pre-construction? So
correct.
Would you need a PE review if you're doing a transit service or programmatic project?
Correct. If you're building something, you would need that. But if you're not building anything, as long as you're able to demonstrate per the CMAQ guidelines that this project is going to have a reduction in ozone or ozone precursors, then you would not need that review on non-infrastructure projects. I have some of the NAPME staff back here that we're writing down these furiously so we can get them on the facts.
Great. I think we have another question from Kent on this side.
Is this a multi-year that we can spend it over several fiscal years, or is this something that we really need to start and only will go for 12 months or till the construction's completed? Thinking of a transit service or something like that, where would it fund more than 1 year of that?
It's an excellent question. There is no statutory deadlines in order to spend regarding these grants. If a project is hasn't expended in a while, the enterprise staff may come back with questions. We're trying to get the money out. But if there is, for your particular example, a project that is looking at year after year, once the grant agreement expires, then there would be no more money. But in that particular example, there may be other potential items coming out of other CDOT enterprises, such as the Clean Transportation Enterprise, that might be worth looking into. So these are probably a one-time allocation per the grant agreement, which and wouldn't be funded after that agreement has expired. But that does not mean that you can't apply for future calls when they become available per the approval of the Board of Directors.
So we could have it over a multiple year if the IGA.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I generally think it's probably about 5 years, but we'll put that in the NOFA when we have it on there. That's usually the standard.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members? I believe we have one more comment from DRCOG.
We just haven't asked enough questions. I'm sorry that you probably feel like you're on the witness stand, so this will be my last one. Darius, you indicated in response to Gene Sampson, if I heard correctly, that potential consideration for more BRT-focused kind of funding call later this summer, but not determined by the NAPME board yet, but will be in the next few months. Did I hear that correctly?
That is correct. The board is in active discussions about that right now.
Okay, so I guess a two-part question related to that. Number one, if someone was interested in a BRT-focused application, when would they know whether they should submit in this current round that we've been talking about or wait until later this summer?
It's an interesting question. I hate to give the incorrect advice. I would suspect that would be the end of the state fiscal year. We should have some sort of idea on whether something would be ready to go out shortly on that. When the larger grant program, I think, would encompass multiple fiscal years and encompass larger dollars, so there may be some nuances from what you expect here. But if you have a project that's in the $2 million or so range, I don't necessarily think that would disqualify you from applying this time.
Okay, and then you alluded to my part B of the question, which is how much money, if you know, might or range of dollars might be available if there was a second call kind of later next summer, more BRT focused? What kind of dollar amount would we be talking about there?
I don't know that offhand right now. I do know in the enterprise's 10-year plan, there is planned dollars that are, I don't want to say allocated, but reserved for that you can see for each fiscal year out to 2032. I don't have those figures off the top of my head, but you're able to see what, based on the forecast that happened a couple of years ago, what those planned dollars are, and the forecast gets updated on a regular basis, so they may not necessarily be total 100% accurate, but generally that's what you can expect.
Okay, thank you. Definitely an indication of interest, not meant to be an inquisition, but thank you so much.
No worries. I'm more worried about ruining this the technology setup up here. So.
That's not hard to do up there, I don't think. So, but yeah, and Jacob, that was stretching the one more question for sure. But I do want to thank CDOT for that great presentation, as well as for a very good conversation. I think those questions really help to define, I think, a lot of what all of us, whenever we have these new programs, there's a lot of unknown, and I know we don't have all the details, and it does sound like maybe we'll get a follow-up clarification on some of these questions to help all the local agencies prepare these applications. So.
Absolutely, and I think I'm not going to touch the computer anymore, but a couple of slides ago, we'll probably have a webinar to answer some of these questions, and staff is happy to come back out to our local partners again to give presentations like this as we get closer to the deadline.
Well, thank you very much. With that, I'm going to release you from the witness stand, so thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, we're going to move on to item number 5. This is an update on the small area forecast review and feedback process. This was attachment C in your packet, and Zachary Feldman, Data and Analytics Manager, will be presenting.
Hi, so yeah, I'm Zach Feldman. I manage the data analytics team, and one of our products is our small area forecast. So what is this small area forecast? It is our census block level forecast of households, population, and employment from 2020 out to 2050. So we're starting with the most current data we have on housing and households and employment, and then we build a forecasting model that aligns with the state demography office. The general use case of this has tended to be internal here to DRCOG. So the DRCOG travel model focus uses this at the transportation analysis zone level. And we are using a lot of publicly available and privately available data. So we're using census data and subscription housing and employment data as well. And the model we're using specifically is UrbanSense. This is an open source predictive model that is actually based on estimated choice models. We could think about this small area forecast as being a kind of intermediary between our data sources and then the projects that use them. So we're using county and regional forecasts from the demography office. We're using housing and employment data. We're using zoning data. We then distribute that out to the 51,000 census blocks in the region, and that then gets used by the travel demand model, regional housing needs assessment, and it also gets used by other local jurisdictions that are looking for specific forecasts for certain geographies. Just to kind of focus on the timeline here, so for the upcoming RTP, the travel model will need an updated data set from this small area forecast by Q3 of 2025, and the DRCOG regional housing needs assessment will need this update in Q1 of 2025. So you've seen this slide before outlining the RTP schedule. The air quality and GHG modeling, that's the piece where a new small area forecast is needed, to just put it in context for timing. So here is kind of an outline of our schedule. So the feedback map has been developed. We're going to start the outreach. We're starting it right now to get everyone ready for this process. We'll send out the forecast for review and comments. Those will be incorporated back into the model, and then it'll be finalized early Q2 of 2025. A lot has changed since the last update of this model. The biggest piece is really going to be a slowdown in forecasted growth from the demography office. That's going to have the biggest impact on this forecast. We've also changed a lot of the model specifications to much better represent growth and household formation to give us a much better handle on the demographics and aging of the region as well. So where there are children, where there are older adults, where there are working adults, where there are larger and smaller household sizes. So what to expect coming down the pipeline, there'll be e-blasts starting in the new year to let people know when this will start. We'll have a Zoom meeting to walk people through and answer questions. We'll also have office hours so that jurisdiction staff can ask questions one-on-one through this period. And we'll be looking at about a 30-day window to provide comments, and this will be starting late January. This is just to give an idea of kind of what people will be looking at. They'll have a map with employment and households and population in 2020, 2050, and they can comment at the census block level. The model is done at block group. So the model is done at the census block level, but because of some of the restrictions on the data, we can't share those at that small geography. So the review will be done at the census block group level. Once we get that feedback, we will incorporate it back into our forecast and rerun everything so we can add existing or near-term development. So if somebody tells us that a project is underway and we're missing it, we can add that in. We can adjust the capacity, so how much we allow a certain area to grow, either in housing or employment. And we can also update our zoning if we have kind of inaccurate capacity for specific zoning. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Feldman, for that presentation. Any questions? Walter?
Thank you. What I'm interested in is, particularly as it relates to employment, that presupposes industrial development. And to what extent is that a part of this study? because industrial development requires transportation assets and resource. So what role does that play within your studies?
So that's a really good question, and it's a really tough problem to crack. So we limit at the census block level the capacity for employment in different areas. So if we don't think that that area has the transportation capacity, the utility capacity, we can limit that so that it doesn't overgrow. And in the model, there are various choice models by sector. So we estimate using historical data where different sectors of employment have tended to land based on various factors throughout the region. And so then we kind of carry those forward out to 2050. But it's not a perfect process. And in general, the employment forecasting is more difficult than the housing and household forecasting. We know kind of what the runway is of a lot of development for housing years, if not decades out, and we don't generally have that level of data for employment.
I was more thinking of the development. It's going along 70 and 25 with the commercial warehouses and facilities, and that's certainly going to attract employment, and it's also going to attract the resource requirements.
Yes, that's definitely true. So we have that zoning capacity in there to kind of figure out what type of employment's going to be landing there. So then that would be the choice models would hopefully tend to place more warehousing. Forecast itself is relatively agnostic to like transportation capacity. So that's really kind of assumed that a certain amount of resources would be put in to kind of make sure that these areas are consistent with infrastructure. Definitely this is where jurisdiction feedback is super important. If staff start telling us that there is not the utilities, the roadways, if there's not the capacity for some of this growth, then we're able to make some adjustments.
Are you done?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. All right, Kent Mormon.
So you're using the DOLA stuff. So it's by county. So when we look at a region, I know that DRCOG is very good when you look back over the data projection population by region, but when we start getting into small area forecast, it seems to be widely varying. As you look at that, and you look at, and you break it down by census groups, are those census groups within the cities or are they within the county? I mean, total county. In other words, will a census group go outside the city limit lines into another city or in an incorporated county? As you look at those census blocks and you group them together. This first question, I have a couple more.
Yeah. In general, they're going to land within a jurisdiction. It's not perfect because the census blocks themselves often cross jurisdiction boundaries. If we think about if the boundary is an alley, that's actually one census block. So it cuts across those boundaries, but they tend to be relatively small variations from the jurisdiction map.
Second question I have is, you talk about household income and age and number of workers per household across the DRCOG area. That varies greatly, even within the counties. How do you account for that for growing cities and cities that are maybe aging, have fewer, et cetera?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And actually, the improvements we've made to the model get a little bit into the weeds, but basically we control for those attributes at each year of the model and then totally resynthesize the population from census public use microdata. So we have kind of full household information and we totally resample as these households age. So households can age, their children can move out, they can age in place, new housing units get built, new households will land in there and tend to be younger with kids. So we're, in general, trying to control for that that shift in demographics.
And this is my final question, and this may not be your area, but in the past, Thornton has asked that the TAZs might be adjusted because of population growth and to get a more accurate number, distribution of traffic. I'm wondering if with the update to the regional transportation plan, TAZ zones, get them maybe smaller in areas that we've had a lot of growth.
Chair Kent, thanks for the question. I'll have to confer with the travel model team. I know they've been looking at that in terms of some adjustments to the travel model heading into this plan cycle. There's, as you can imagine, some impact on the efficiency of the model run times as you start to grow the number of transportation analysis zones. But I know they had been looking at some of that. I just don't know off the top of my head where the status of those conversations. I'll get back to you.
And just to add, even without changes in the TAZ shape, we can still incorporate some of the changes because we're doing the modeling at the block level, and then we kind of build this mesh of points. And so that the weight of where this housing employment lands in that larger geography can shift throughout the TAZ. So we're not totally losing that smaller geography data.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? All right, we'll start with Matt Collison over there.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. Good presentation. Thank you, Zachary. Take into consideration age-restricted communities. It affects the household formation.
No, that's a really good point. We don't explicitly. We are controlling for the current age of the household. So if there tend to be older adults there now, they're going to continue to age. What could happen is later in the forecast when they move out, younger people can move in. Yeah, that's a really good point that I don't think we've really thought about. We're usually looking at a census block as the smallest geography, but when we think about how people are moving around the region, we're really thinking even a little bit bigger than that. So it would need to be a pretty big community, like more than one census block development to really kind of affect the model. But yeah, it's a good point.
So that would be an opportunity for local common sense and information to.
Yeah, if there's feedback that we're kind of missing on, particularly with the older adults, yeah.
Second follow-up question, in terms of, someone mentioned utilities, I think Kent did, water, how figuratively does that enter into ability to serve, particularly commercial?
Yeah, so we can account for that, but we have a pretty blunt tool. So we can lower the kind of capacity for employment. Other than that, we don't have a lot of way to kind of calculate number of jobs in each sector by how much water usage. So if during this process jurisdictions feel like there's too much employment land in an area, we can lower it, but not necessarily make limits on like the sector. Like we wouldn't necessarily be able to take out a high water use sector of jobs and put in a low water use sector of jobs.
I was thinking more in the terms of spatial allocation in areas or set up to be and programmed to be well served by adequate supplies versus further remoter areas that are struggling with structure.
Yeah, so definitely that broadly employment's a little bit easier for us. If jurisdictions let us know that they do not have the water to kind of support that, we can lower those capacities and rerun the model.
Thank you.
You hear that question? I believe David Krutzinger had a question.
David Krutzinger, City and County of Denver. Will or can DRCOG provide old 2050 versus new 2050 numbers for comparison purposes, given that the regions have 200,000 fewer people?
Yes, so at the TAZ level, it is available currently on DRCOG's data catalog. We don't currently have it in this review process at the TAC level, but it will be made available once it's finalized. I think for this review process, that can be difficult because there are so many things that have changed, the demography office forecasts, our modeling work, and also we're kind of trying to keep up to date with all of the development, both employment and housing. So 6 more years of growth is a lot in this region. So even just what exists on the ground, so our 2023 is going to be very different than the last 2023 because we actually know what happened.
Any other questions or comments? All right, not seeing any. Want to thank again Zachary Feldman. Thank you very much for that presentation.
Great, thank you.
And if anyone has questions, the email is obviously on the board there to follow up. Up next, we have item number 6. This was attachment D in your packet. An update on the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan scenario planning. We have Alvin Vidal Sanchez, the Region Transportation Planning Program Manager, to present.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So my item will be a follow-up from the discussion we had about a month and a half ago on scenarios. So since then, we've met with the Regional Transportation Committee and the Board of Directors, and so we want to share the feedback that we've heard across each of these different venues. What are some potential next steps? How can this feedback get incorporated across DRCOG's planning work? And then next steps for this particular effort itself. Try not to touch too much on this podium. So a quick refresher, this is one major activity for the Regional Transportation Plan update. So in orange on this screen, we are in the middle of our scenario analysis work. We hope to have that complete by Q1, end of Q1 of next year, and that'll help impact the candidate project solicitation and evaluation process. So we had an internal kickoff in September of this year where we gathered staff feedback. October is when we kicked off the Regional Transportation Plan update with the TAC, as well as gathered feedback from this group. We went before the RTC in November, as well as got feedback from them in November and did an update for the board on the overall update that we're undertaking for the Regional Transportation Plan. We didn't get feedback from the board until earlier this month, and so we are now at the point of sharing what those results look like across the 3 different committees compiled, and then we'll begin defining those scenarios this month and then into next year. And so continue defining those scenarios. We want to start modeling, start testing, and then sharing the results as they become available. So for each of these, we're just going to show a word cloud across each of those questions. We asked 6 questions across each of the 3 committees, boards, and the internal staff feedback. The first we asked was around demographic shifts. I will note for all of these, there has been some theming for them. So in this case, you might have seen a lot of more older adults, increasing older adults, growing older adults. That's just been combined into a larger older adults theme. But as you look at this slide, older adults working from home, fewer workers, and slower population growth are the major themes we've heard across each of the 3 bodies and staff internal feedback. No real surprises from those 4 major ones, especially considering we discussed what the new forecast for the region looked like over the next 20 to 30 years. But as you move across this slide, maybe look a little deeper, there could be some interesting ones that might surprise you, might not surprise you. How can they actually be incorporated into either of our models? Could they affect some other planning work that we're doing here at the agency? In terms of emerging economic trends, e-commerce and work from home were the big ones that came out of our feedback. We are already trying to take into account that stickiness of work from home post-pandemic. How can we continue to make sure we're showing that appropriately in our travel model? Artificial intelligence was a hot topic amongst all 3 groups. Would be an interesting one to try and test in either of our models, maybe not something best equipped for those 2 tools, and then interest in a service-based economy. In that case, could we talk about other planning work that DRCOG is doing? We're about to kick off an update to our freight plan, so how can we make sure that we're touching on this important topic during that specific modal effort? Technological advancements, microtransit, artificial intelligence again, electric vehicles, and autonomous vehicles. One that I would touch on is autonomous vehicles. This was one that we explored 4 years ago during our last scenario planning work. We felt at that time that just the range of impacts were still pretty broad. There wasn't a definitive answer on whether these would be positive or negative impacts on our transportation system. So ultimately, the findings that we saw out of that was just a large range of potential impacts. So potential to continue exploring that, but just knowing where we were 4 years ago, do we have a better handle on AVs since then? And then similar to my point earlier, drone delivery could be something that we touch on in our multimodal freight plan update that we kick off later this year. So there are a lot of different ways that this feedback will be used beyond just our scenario work. It could also inform the other planning products that we're currently developing, want to develop, or are looking forward to developing next year. Changes in land use patterns. A lot of feedback related to recent state mandates. So redevelopment, infill, density, suburban development, office building vacancy was one that came up in all three groups. An interesting one that we've tried to wrestle with internally on how could that potentially be shown in either of the models. But obviously, with the stickiness of work from home and lower occupancy rates across key parts of the region, what impacts could that have on growth and mobility in the region? In terms of environmental changes, wildfire and water availability were the top two that came out of our feedback results. More extreme events, heat also came out. One that could be interesting, heat, knowing hotter temperatures, a little warmer temperatures, how do folks' propensity for particular modes potentially change? Something to explore potentially. Wildfire, some of these maybe more one-off events might not be appropriate for our travel model, for our land use model, but how could we use other tools that are available to help inform the projects that ultimately get included in the plan, and potentially other policies that we establish or look to explore here at DRCOG when in the region. And potential disruptions or emergencies, very similar theme to the environmental disruptions. Flooding was the larger one that came out of that one. Wildfire remained one of those top answers, and then water shortage, so water availability. Some themes in these last two. There's already work out there around resilience. How can we leverage that work in this new RTP update, potentially through the models, potentially through other tools that might be available to us. Overall, the major themes we heard were growing older adult population, and then all the changes that just come with that. How are they housing differently? How are they moving differently? What are their needs? How are those different from a general population and compared to 4 years ago when we had different tools available to us? Increasing disruptions and impacts from climate change on our infrastructure. That's both in terms, or that's all in terms of transportation, housing, power. Can the grid that we have sustain some of those efforts? Continued proliferation of new technologies. AI, like you saw, was a really big one. I expect the jury's still out on the effects of that particular technology on the transportation system on housing. But automation, autonomous connected electric vehicles. And then one that we continue to explore is just the staying power of some of those post-COVID-19 trends, specifically work from home, but home delivery, an increase in that, and then e-commerce. So potentially topics to explore during the next major freight plan update, not just here in the RTP. So potential impacts of how are we going to use this feedback. We would like this scenario planning effort to revise the fiscally constrained list of investment priorities that we do include in the regional transportation plan. But there's a lot of other ways that we can use this feedback, and that does include potentially including new information in the plan, including new information on potential policy stances the agency wants to take, new metrics to evaluate some of those priorities. If we see that resilience is important to us, maybe we can fully flesh it out through the travel model, but are there other metrics we could be evaluating our projects with? And then, like I've mentioned throughout all of these, guidance and direction for future planning efforts. I've been touching on the freight plan pretty consistently throughout this. We can take this feedback and incorporate it into that effort that will be kicking off later next year. But are there other plans that are currently in the works that we might want to kick off that we don't currently have in the docket that touch on some of these topics that are of interest to the committees and the board? Before we get into immediate next steps, just a reminder of something pretty consistent for DRCOG in terms of the scenario work is these are really big what if questions, what if scenarios. They're always relative, so they're not extremely rigorous. We're not choosing or judging scenarios. This last scenario cycle, we didn't choose travel choices scenario at the expense of any of the others. They were really trying to help us better understand what are trade-offs that occur when these choices are made, and just give us guidance as staff and as committees and the board on where do we want to go in the region. So we expect this approach, this guidance, to be pretty consistent in this next scenario planning effort. We don't expect to have a batch of projects we're testing compared to another batch of projects and then selecting scenario C because we think it gets us closest to our MetroVision or RTP metrics, but it helps us learn the choices and trade-offs that occur when different decisions are made in terms of mobility and growth. So immediate next steps, we've been taking this feedback and want to start defining what some of those scenarios look like. How are they actually capable of being modeled, if at all? So we do want to start that modeling, start testing. When we start testing, we start seeing if there are any surprises that come out. We didn't expect that particular metric to change in the way it did. Do we trust that actually is supposed to change that way? And then share results with the committees and the board as they become available. Last cycle, it was about a 60 to 70 slide presentation. Don't know if that will be what occurs later next year, but we do want to obviously share what we get out of this scenario planning work and how we expect it to impact the physically constrained projects and investments in the RTP. That concludes my presentation, Chair.
Very much, Alvin. Any questions on this very important topic for DRCOG staff? Yes, Matt Collison.
Thank you, Chair. Alvin, appreciate the presentation. You mentioned new metric consideration of new metrics, and or may be applicable to evaluating and assessing the differences scenarios. Can you share with us some preliminary thinking on those, or are those still in the developmental?
Oh, just an idea right now. Right now, Chapter 4 of the Regional Transportation Plan is our Measuring Success chapter. So that brings in our MetroVision targets, some of the targets we've set in the RTP, other modal plans like our Vision Zero plan. And so whatever those might be, if any do occur, we could evaluate those in what is currently Chapter 4 of the plan. But right now, that's just an idea of how can we use this information to inform not just the projects that get included in the plan, but also evaluation for outcomes.
Back. Any other questions or comments? We've seen this a few times out, so you appear to be getting off a little easier than others today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Our next presenter, this is item number 7. This is attachment E in your packet. An update on the Crash Data Consortium, and Eric Broughton, Senior Safety Planner, will be making the presentation.
All right, thank you, Chair. My name is Eric Broughton, a Senior Safety Planner here at DRCOG, and thank you for joining today. Here to do an update on the Crash Data Consortium. This is a project that DRCOG kicked off in the end of 2022, really towards the idea of investigating and demonstrating the value of a group to work to identify and address common issues with crash data collection, processing, and analysis. This has been born out of work done over years where DRCOG has received crash data from the Colorado Department of Transportation, geocoded records, done some data enrichment, and working with our partners. We identified this opportunity to really work as a group to see how we can make some improvements in this area. This program had been funded for the last 2 years by a 405C Traffic Records Improvement Grant from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. This was new sort of funding that DRCOG hadn't applied for before, but we were able to get 2 years of funding through this to kick off this program, pilot it. And just one important note, this grant program, while we were able to use it for the last 2 years of this program, is not meant to permanently fund. It's really meant as seed money, kind of a pilot program. And so we had sought that, and we've kind of rolled this into our current funding or planning. A brief timeline on the work that we've done through this program. In the first year of this federal fiscal year 2023, we had done a ton of surveys and interviewing. We talked with over 50 or 60 stakeholders in the region. That's different transportation planners, traffic engineers, members of law enforcement, our partners at the Department of Transportation, Department of Public Health, Revenue, and others. We held some meetings and workshopping to work through some of the findings we had come together with, met 3 times in order and use those opportunities to build cohesion in the group and share out information. In federal fiscal year 2024, we continued more stakeholder engagement, kept talking with people we had talked before, and kept reaching out to more partners. Took the inventory and needs assessment that we created, remediated it, and shared it online on the DRCOG websites. Did a end-of-year survey for stakeholders to learn about how we had made improvements or what we had learned from them. And we did publish a final report in September of 2024, which details all of the findings and different recommendations and strategies to make improvements. Some of the key deliverables that we have created through the course of this project have been a crash data inventory, needs assessment based off of the inventory, again, this end-of-year survey I just mentioned, and importantly, the final report, which details, again, all of the outcomes, recommendations, and strategies. And these files, all except for the survey, are available on the DRCOG website. The inventory was the first document produced by this process, and it details the stakeholder engagement process that we had followed, talking about describing all the data source descriptions that we went through. Largely, this is based off of surveys and, again, many interviews and conversations with stakeholders talking about what kind of data they're using, what they're using it for, why they're using one source over another, what objectives they're looking to meet, what analysis goals do they have. And so we use this and combine this and create this document which details all of these. And importantly, towards the end, we also have a list of, current to that time, of the different sources that were used. And interestingly describes, one thing that I found interesting, I think that's really important, is that most stakeholders reported using more than one data source, whether that's their local PD data and CDOT data, the local PD data, CDOT data, and DRCOG data. There's different reasons for different data sets used for different purposes. And so that was something that I think was really important that came out of that process, that understanding. After creating this inventory and working with stakeholders, we created a needs assessment, which went into different specific needs that were identified by these members. And part of this was including looking at different strategies and resources and barriers that we could preliminarily identify as might be either obstacles or answers to helping to address some of these problems. And included in that needs assessment was a cross-reference back to the inventory. So they would talk between each other, and if one finds something in the needs assessment, you could find that more information about that in the inventory. The 6 main needs that we heard about from talking again with these dozens of stakeholders were geospatial in nature, largely wanting more latitude and longitude in the data, and also improving some of the accuracy of latitude and longitude. The quality of the data, we kept hearing there's inconsistency in some of the sources and between sources. Timeliness of the data, there's an extensive process that crash data needs to go through from when a crash happens to when it's able to be used by analysts. And depending on if it's coming from a police department, they might be able to get that to a local transportation planner or traffic engineer within a week or a month, depending on the process. If they're looking to use CDOT or DRCOG data, it's typically about over a year at this point to get that data for various reasons. Capacity of the group was also a need that we had heard about, wanted to find ways to prolong this effort and grow this integration of data, and that includes everything from how databases work together to bringing in just alternative data. Maybe there's not a way to link one-to-one, one data set to another data set effectively, but how can they influence each other and learn from each other? And finally, accessibility of the data. How do we make this data accessible? How do we make sure that people who want to use it or need to use it for the work that they're doing have access to it, and it's easily understandable, and they can make actionable uses of it? As noted, we did a survey at the end of the year, just reached the e-blast to all of our stakeholder consortium stakeholders, and we heard that the median frequency was about right, about 3 times a year, so we're planning on continuing that. Pretty much all had either, our members, many there are people in TAC here who are part of the consortium, which is great, so they of course know about DRCOG, but there were some folks who hadn't had any exposure to the organization before. So while that wasn't an explicit goal of the grant, it is kind of a cool thing that we were able to expand kind of the reach and get more people tied into regional planning. There's a diverse participation among the professions represented in the consortium, including responses from local government, we had responses from law enforcement, I believe. We had responses from Department of Transportation, Department of Revenue, Public Health. So I was pretty pleased with that. Everyone had said that the consortium had helped them understand the crash data environment in Colorado better, which was great. And more than half said that they had seen some data quality improvements throughout the course of the last 2 years. The final report that we published in September 2024 really dives into the core goals and outcomes that we want to look to, really, again, investigating and demonstrating the value of this sort of a organization, a working group or a consortium, and working to identify some of these issues and addressing some of these common challenges. And again, this was distributed through our email, as is all with the consortium members, and it's also been available for download on the DRCOG website. Our grant did include several performance metrics. First and foremost was looking at trying to increase the number of missing percentage, latitude and longitude. And this is something that, through the data, we did discover that there has been an improvement in the number of records being collected with that latitude and longitude. Integration was another goal, wanting to connect the crash data to a linear referencing system. And this is something that DRCOG staff, along with a lot of support from partners at the Colorado Department of Transportation, were able to tie DRCOG records to the linear referencing system that CDOT maintains. And through a kind of a new process we developed, we were able to link at least 59% of those records to that referencing system. And then accessibility-wise, our goal was to increase the spread of those being able to use this data. And we were tracking this by the number of downloads through a set time period on our DRCOG data catalog. We're aiming for a 25% increase, and through our data showed a 64% increase in downloads. The outcomes that we seek and are explained in the final report really come down to improving the data quality, more accurate latitudes and longitudes, importantly, less missing data. There's oftentimes we're hearing that there's fields on the form that aren't filled out or aren't filled out entirely or completely. And then wanting to lessen the amount of personally identifiable information that's found in the report so they can use the accessibility and data sharing. We're looking to improve the timeliness of this crash data delivery so that it can be taken out and given to stakeholders at a more timely manner and be able to affect the work that everyone's doing more quickly. And improve the access of the data and the accessibility of it. So the greater understanding of it, greater access to the narratives and diagrams, which are components that are not always available in reports, but they can be incredibly valuable when digging into the specifics of a crash or a crash pattern. And then increasing the number and depth of partnerships. I'm really pleased with the engagement we've had so far in this project, and really looking to see how we can continue to bring others into the fold and into this work. Specifically focusing on law enforcement and the medical field right now. And we've had a lot of our contacts have been in the transportation realm, as might be expected, transport engineers, planners, et cetera. But these partners are very important, not only in how they create the data, but how they use it and how that informs our own work. So really working on bringing more of those fields into the group. Recommendations in the report follow along 6 kind of broad categories. The first 3 are definitely related, but the first 3 really look into how the reports are being completed in the first place. And when you get into that, the detail kind of differentiate down into the location information that can be found in the report, and then critical data elements that help to flesh out the understanding of what's happening and able to make the data more useful. Then we also look into the processing practices of the data, how that can be improved or managed better. Again, looking into how the data can be accessed by others and used. And then again, continuing to expand and make sure there's a sustainable effort behind this. The report includes a number of strategies for each of these recommendations and an estimated time frame on how these are to be accomplished, between estimating that a certain thing might take a couple of years to get something running, and some may, of course, take 4 to 5 years, depending on the complexity of certain issues. While the strategies don't all follow this framework, it is kind of the rough framework of the strategies. There's sort of a cascading effect to how some of these recommendations work. So a large part of this really comes into the way that the data is coming in. And so standardizing the input of the data as it comes from law enforcement is a really important first step. And interesting with this, one thing that I learned, and we learned this process largely through working with law enforcement and with our partners at Revenue and Department of Transportation, is that sometimes there are issues just in how the data is being transmitted. The law enforcement is collecting the data, they're filling out the report, they're doing everything they're supposed to be doing, and there may be bugs in the software or the transmission line where their software has the information as one field type of information, and the state is expecting something else, and so it comes through as blank. That's something that we've heard, and we are trying to see how we can help address that. And because if our law enforcement is out there doing the hard work, we want to make sure that it's being captured correctly. Once we're able to hopefully get this data in more consistently, more accurately, the idea being it takes less time to process. There's less time is needed to manually go into the records, check things, make sure that things are good, checking between different types of fields and making determinations based on those fields, what other information can be gleaned from it. So by improving the standardization means there's less time for it to be in the system being processed, and we should be able to get higher quality data out to the community and to analysts sooner. This is not a complete list of strategies, but just a handful that I have pulled from the reports to share. One thing that we've talked about as a group with stakeholders has been to look at the software that's being used, either developing or acquiring different types of software that law enforcement agencies can use. There's a wide range of applications, and there's pros and cons to each one, and so that's something that seeing if there's a way to standardize that could also be as a benefit that some states have done. Requiring more data elements to be filled out on the report. Right now, there's only a handful of fields that technically need to be required for a report to be accepted by the Department of Revenue. And one of those is not location. Most law enforcement agencies are collecting that in certain ways, but there are certain elements that don't need to be collected. And if we want to fix that and maybe make sure that that is being there. Facilitating training with law enforcement and other stakeholders in the data. There's some practices like this already happening. FHWA and CDOT have had some things like that, and we've been working with them on things like that. Again, looking at these data transmission issues and how that can be resolved. Continue to engage with law enforcement and others, but to learn about what's working well, what's not working well, to see if there's things that one agency can learn from another and do across the board to learn from each other. And then finally, building connections with the medical field again. They're kind of after the fact in a lot of ways with some of the data, but they do play a crucial role in certain elements, especially as it comes to impairments and for some categories of crashes where it's not technically considered a crash by the law, but people are still being involved in incidents that I think most people would colloquially call crashes. So trying to see how we can maybe see if there's an underreporting of certain types of events that could be captured that would inform the decisions being made in this space. So the next steps of this project, and again, I know I mentioned this was a 2-year project, but it was 2 years of that 405C grant funding. So DRCOG has decided to continue the work of the Crash Data Consortium as really part of the broader Regional Vision Zero project of traffic safety and transportation planning. Using these strategies and recommendations in the final report, we are working to prioritize these and to determine who really has the lead role in taking on some of these actions. We're going to continue having some of these consortium meetings. We've been doing it on a 3-time-a-year schedule. I believe that's what we are likely to do, and we're planning on a first meeting for 2025 to be towards the end of January. And more information will be available soon about that. And then just, again, continuing to build and maintain these relationships that have been created through this process, especially with law enforcement, the medical field, and of course with those who have already been involved in these efforts, local governments, state government agencies, and so on. With that, I will open any questions.
Yes, thank you, Eric Broughton, for that presentation and all that information. Any questions or comments from members? Yes, Matt Collison.
Thank you, Eric, for the presentation. A couple questions. Any thought of looking at it from an analytics perspective, proactive, identifying clusters of near misses for a certain pattern of crashes and how you would apply that across the land? Perspectives, find operations.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yes, I think that's something that we're really looking to do in this next year, and also as part of the greater Regional Vision Zero program, is trying to get more of that predictive analytic side of things on it. Crash data is kind of inherently reactive, looking backwards, but of course, part of the National Roadway Safety Strategy is being proactive, and crashes can in some ways be maybe not predicted where they are going to be, but just where there's higher incidence. I think that a great thing that will come of the work we've done is with that linear referencing system. We should be able to use that. We're working on ways to try to combine road volumes and other elements with that. And I think that through that linear referencing system, we should hopefully be able to do some more of these predictive analysis, as well as we develop our capacity on that side of the shop here. But I think those are really important points, and that's something that we'd like to step into further.
Thank you, Mac. Any other questions or comments? Oh, yes, Michelle Melanakis.
Michelle Melanakis, Boulder County, City of Lafayette. Eric, I just wanted to say you guys did I think, an amazing job of really listening to the stakeholders, and I think you guys are hitting on the key of what's most important to make things better, and I really appreciate the work you've already done, and I'm really excited to see the consortium continue.
Thank you. Yep. Wally?
We've talked in the past about collecting commercial carrier data to see if the role that commercial vehicles play in some of these crashes. The other thing I would encourage you to look at is if there's some concentrations, which example might be at an intermodal terminal, a gravel quarry, somewhere where there's intense activity. If there's something going on there, there's a cluster, that might be worth looking at for remediation, and it may be a simple remediation. So that's a factor that I'm familiar with the trucking industry and how we operate, and there are clusters, and they're around the warehouses and other places, and there may be something there that needs minimal attention and pays big dividends.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, and I think that I know that in the data there is vehicle distinctions in the types, and it's sometimes hard to square or really figure out what types of vehicles are involved. It's not as cut and dry as I might hope it would be. But we have had some interaction with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration early on in this, and I'd be interested to try to get back in touch with them and see if they have some resources that can help aid with that sort of work or analysis.
Thank you very much. Other questions or comments? I believe we have some from Mr. Reger.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Michelle took some of the words out of my mouth, but I just wanted to kind of recognize Eric. When we started this work 2 years ago, it was a brand new grant for us. It was a brand new program. We hired Eric to implement this grant. Everything was new for him, new program, new agency, new project. Really did a wonderful job. And not just Eric, this was a multi-divisional project at DRCOG, so there were several staff involved, and I want to thank all the staff. But also, as you gather, this was a partnership-based project, right? So all of you at the local governments, CDOT, Department of Revenues, law enforcement, there were so many stakeholders, so many folks involved in this. So I just want to give some appreciation. I think this is a great foundation. As Eric said, we're going to continue the work. We were fortunate to keep Eric on as one of our, what will be 2 senior safety planners at DRCOG. So we're going to weave this crash data consortium work directly into our safety, our broader safety and Regional Vision Zero work. So we're excited about what's been done, and we're excited about the potential for what's ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Any other questions or comments, or apparently compliments? Those are going around. Eric's like, I'll take those. I'll add one more. So yeah, I did just, I wanted to thank DRCOG staff as well as the team. Obviously, we are all focused on Vision Zero and safety improvements within our own boundaries and our own jurisdictions, but this is much more of a regional issue, and we will only see these big improvements, right, when we look at it from a regional level, and I really appreciate DRCOG taking that role on and helping all of us at local jurisdictions, right, be able to put all that together and really make a bigger difference. So I look forward to seeing the work that DRCOG is going to continue on this, and also thank DRCOG for continuing this beyond that 2-year pilot. I think it's something that's going to make a big difference, so thank you. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our last discussion item of the day. That is item number 8, attachment F in your packet, the 2023 annual report on roadway traffic congestion in the Denver region. And Max Monk, the assistant planner, will be presenting. And if you did not pick up one of these very fancy documents, they are over on the table over here if you would like to see these and have a copy as we go through it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the committee. I actually have my manager, Robert, handing these out to anybody who would like them. So you do not have to get up. Just raise your hand. But good afternoon. My name is Max Monk, as was mentioned. I'm a planner here at DRCOG. I've been here about a year and a half. This is my second time presenting to all of the committees, and I'm here to provide an update on what I presented on last, which was the 2022 annual report on congestion. And this year, I'm here to talk about 2023 and what has changed. So to go over a quick agenda, I'll provide an overview of the congestion management process, why we do it, and what all it entails. I'll touch on the trends and observations we saw in 2023. So this will include an update surrounding vehicle miles traveled, transit ridership, and shared micromobility usage. We'll take a look at 2050 and how we can expect congestion to look should the trends that we observed last year continue onwards into the future. Every year we try to take on a special topic analysis where we look at something of interest in the region as it relates to congestion. And this, for this report, we elected to continue an analysis that we did in our 2022 report, which looked at the shifting dynamics of trends along commute corridors following the pandemic. And then lastly, we wanted to add some value and look at a few other things impacted by the pandemic, and more specifically telework. So we'll touch on that as well. So to provide a quick overview of the congestion management process. So this is a federally required process. Other MPOs of DRCOG's similar size are all required to do this. So this is a core process to the agency. Components of DRCOG's process include the annual report, which many of you have in front of you. It's also hosted online, a database of roadway attributes and traffic counts and incidents and crash incidents, and then some multimodal data metrics looking at things like transit ridership and shared mobility. And now is probably a good time to know I threw a lot of new pictures into the presentation to try to change things up. I want to give special thanks to CDOT and RTD. A lot of these pictures came from them. You will see them credited on each slide. But to start with vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. So VMT refers to the total mileage traveled across all vehicles on all of the region's roads on a given day. So this is a daily metric. You can see that from 2000 to roughly 2006, VMT increased before flattening in the Great Recession period, and then increasing again to flatten out at around 85 million miles on the average day in 2019. It took a pretty stark decrease with the pandemic as travel behavior shifted. It rebounded in 2021 and increased by 1% going into 2022, and we saw a 2% increase going into 2023. So we are seeing VMT continue to rise, and as of 2023, we have officially reached exactly where we were at before the pandemic at around 85 million VMT. And it's important to note that's despite adding roughly 85,000 new residents to our region. So it's a big population increase, and we're only just reaching where we were. I also want to point out that we do have a target in our MetroVision plan of 23 VMT per capita, so just VMT as it relates to the region's population. And we very briefly hit that target in 2020, just influenced again by the pandemic. To talk about transit ridership, so this chart that you see on screen represents, it's a little bit different than the previous one. So the blue line is going to represent 2019 as a baseline. So that's looking at roughly 350,000 boardings on the average weekday. And the orange line represents a percentage difference from that baseline. So we saw ridership bottom out at around 70% of 2019 levels in April, and it's gradually increased from that point, but still well below where it was. I want to call out Zero Fare for Better Air, which for those who may not be aware was the state's pilot program to make transit free in the region and in other parts of the state to help encourage people to change their travel choices to take transit and reduce impacts to air quality. So I call this out for that reason, and it came out in July and August of 2023 also. And these were the points that we've seen of the highest ridership since the pandemic began. And it's important to note this program wasn't continued into 2024 for RTD, but just calling out again, be it slight highest points, but highest points of ridership, and just wanted to note that. And then we also wanted to look a little bit deeper at transit, and this is a little bit of a crude analysis we did, but I think it's also very illustrative. We took a look at RTD's Colorado Station Park and Ride, and just Google Earth again. This is just one really crude snapshot, but as I think many of us in this room know, a lot of these park and rides were really utilized before the pandemic. In 2019, you can see that the Google Earth image shows that this lot is basically at capacity, but in 2024, that's still down. So this just shows that not only are we seeing it in the ridership numbers, but in the real world, day to day as well. To talk about shared micromobility usage. So shared micromobility refers to human-scaled transportation, so thinking things like scooters, bikes, that can be shared and reserved among members of the public. And this has become increasingly adopted by different jurisdictions in the region, and this is a mode that we're proud to show has grown. There's been more than triple ridership since before the pandemic, and this is not a silver bullet for congestion by any means, but it's an important option that can help address the first to last mile barrier associated with transit, and it just serves as a choice for especially those more urban centers where if there's a lot of congestion, people have another option to get around. So next, I want to talk about how we can expect congestion to look in 2050 should the trends that we observed continue onwards. So vehicle miles traveled is projected to grow by 42% on the average 2050 weekday, so we're expecting to see more driving activity happening in the region. The cost of congestion in the region is expected to increase as well, and I just want to note that our estimated cost of congestion is really just a crude way to put this into economic terms that people can relate to and understand. It takes into account time spent in traffic, fuel spent, goods delayed, so on. So we can expect that economic burden to increase. And then over a third of lane miles are expected to be congested for 3 hours or more in the region in 2050. So we're expecting a spatial spread of congestion as well. And then lastly, we've thrown this around year over year, but it continues to be true. Congestion at 2 p.m. in 2050, it can be expected to look and feel a lot like it did at 5 p.m. in 2023. So we're expecting, that traffic intensity to spread not only spatially, but temporally too earlier in the day. And I just want to note that all of these are pretty consistent with what we saw in 2022 as well. And so apologies, I would make this map look a little more interesting and animated, but it is a little bit tricky now with accessibility stuff, but so bear with the simplicity. But the blue lines that you see on screen represent corridors that we identified as congested in 2023. So you can see a lot of core freeways and arterials, a lot of I-25, Interstate 70. And then the orange lines represent additional corridors we can expect to be congested in 2050. So I think this really illustrates that spatial spread of congestion, a lot more arterials, more freeways like the 36 north of I-25 and so on. So to shift gears and talk about the special topic analysis we took on, which looked at different commute corridors. And this may be a memory for those in the room, but I'll just give a quick overview. So telework, as all of us in the room know, telework became a public health necessity with COVID. People who could work from home were encouraged and at times required to. And telework remains prevalent. It's an option that employers continue to offer to their workers, and it impacts people's travel choices. And we're building on this analysis from the previous report. Just look at how these dynamics have continued to evolve. Telework is still a hot topic here, and we're just very curious to see how this sort of new normal following the pandemic is continuing. And to do this analysis, we looked at traffic volume data and travel time data from CDOT and NRICS respectively. So before going into the specifics of the analysis, I want to talk about, work from home rates in terms of commute trips to work versus other modes. So the blue line you see on the screen represents the percentage of people in the region that worked from home. And I believe that's some or all of the time. And then the green line represents the rate of people that commute to work by any means other than driving by themselves. So, and I just show this to show just how big of an impact that worked from home rate really had on that non-SOV rate. And it's also important to note that we have a target in our MetroVision plan for 35% non-SOV mode share. And because of, work from home and these changes, we've hit this goal. But as work from home rates are starting to decline, we are moving, back in the other direction towards coming out of compliance with this target. So to go into more specifics of the analysis, we looked at 3 corridors. These are the exact same corridors from last year. Lakewood to downtown Denver, represented by US 6 that you see on the map in orange. Highlands Ranch to the Denver Tech Center in purple, and then Mid-Aurora to the Denver Airport in blue. So looking at that Lakewood to Denver morning commute, we saw higher traffic levels in 2023 than in 2019, considering all time periods. So more vehicles are on this facility across the whole day. However, there are 6% fewer vehicles during the AM peak compared to 2019. And I want to note that this is down from last year's 17%. So we're seeing more people starting to commute more in the mornings. And I think this is maybe a sign or a symptom rather from the declining work from home rates. Telecommuting and flexible schedules are a key answer, and again, their impacts are starting to decline. So we're starting to see shifts back towards the trends that we were seeing prior to the pandemic. And just noting, there's still lower travel time and higher speeds slightly on this corridor, and that does have air quality benefits. If traffic's moving more fluidly, they're not stopping and going and emitting more. For the Mid-Aurora to Denver Airport corridor, traffic was down 8% from 2019 levels in 2020. So it was only down briefly because it's already 8% higher than those same levels in 2023. So we've seen a strong level of recovery and growth along this corridor, which is expected, right? The area continues to see new development and jobs coming online. The airport is still seeing increases in passenger ridership, and again, this is consistent with last year's report, and we're expecting this corridor to continue to increase in its congestion. And then lastly, the Highlands Ranch to Denver Tech Center corridor. This one had higher traffic levels in 2023, and I think a bigger part of this than we acknowledged in 2022 was the construction of the managed lanes along C470, which you can see in the image on screen. 2019 with the construction, I think maybe wasn't the most representative of pre-pandemic conditions along that corridor. But that said, we're still seeing lower travel times along this corridor than we did in the past. And again, stronger impacts than given credit for. Some key takeaways, telework continues to impact travel behavior. And, I think that's a really big piece, right? And you'll see me go into this in more detail in a second, but it impacts where people even choose to live, right? Being able to work from home. As rates decline and more people move to the region, we're seeing that shift back towards traditional trends. And trends continue to evolve geographically, right? That Lakewood corridor is shifting really back towards a traditional look, but the airport corridor is continuing to have really fast growth. And then we wanted to add value by looking at a few different things that are especially related to work from home, and adjacent to congestion. So we looked at changes to downtown Denver's population, and we used zip code 80202, which encompasses most of downtown as a proxy. And you can see that prior to the pandemic, we had growth in this zip code in terms of population. But going into 2021, we saw a roughly 13.5% decrease in population. And I think this is emblematic of the work from home impacting people's decisions. If I only have to come in a couple of times a week, maybe I'm okay living further and having, I don't know, maybe more space. So this is something we observed, and it does appear that downtown's population has started to rebound. Oh, and I do also want to note this chart only goes up to 2022. At the time this presentation was made, that was the most recent year's worth of data for this geography. We also looked at office vacancies across the region, and this chart is produced by data from CoStar, which is a real estate data company. And this represents office vacancy for the whole region. So you can see that in the recession period, it was in between 10 and 15%, and that's around where we are today in 2024, closer to 15%. And I do want to note that the Central Business District downtown is much higher at around 24.5%. And just really calling out, this is, I think, another impact from increased work from home. There's less demand from companies to have an office space, and this is continuing to evolve. In terms of retail, same data source, but retail instead of office focus, that has had a little bit of an easier recovery, but again, the Central Business District is higher in this space, and I think that's because the retail environment really does respond to the office uses that are occurring around it. And then the last big one we looked at was trends in multi-unit residential. We've still seen a lot of growth in the region in terms of housing development, and the numbers speak for themselves. I'm not going to speak too much to that, but yeah, given that these other places other uses are struggling with work from home, it has not slowed the development of housing in this region. So in conclusion, we're expecting congestion to intensify and worsen by 2050. And it's going to be really important, I think, to dig into, the goals that we've set out in our plans. But at the same time, we're doing a lot of this work already. We're doing transportation demand management, which helps to encourage people to switch their auto trips into multimodal trips through Way to Go. We have projects that facilitate travel choices to help people avoid and adapt to those worst, congestion impacts. We're currently partnering with the state and who's doing a household travel survey. This really is so important in terms of informing our planning decisions. It is a really big basis for our model. So this is going to be a really important effort for the congestion work as well. And of course, we have organizations like Denver Region ITS and many of your wonderful jurisdictions and the Advanced Mobility Partnership. So, the future it's in our hands, and we are doing a lot of important work to help mitigate these impacts. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, Mr. Chair, and thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Max, for that presentation and information. Any questions from members or comments? Start with me. Oh, yeah. We'll start with, all right, Michelle, you won. Congratulations.
Michelle Malinakis again, Boulder. I just had a question. Anecdotally, I would say that travel has changed by day of week, both for bus and cars. Did you all see that in the data at all? Or was
I think that in terms of day of week, it was pretty consistent with what we saw in 2022, which, especially Friday was kind of a wonky day. The weekends are wonky. But yeah, I think the biggest impact we noticed was in that AM peak change that we saw in the Lakewood corridor. That's continued forward, but its impacts are lessening. Does that answer your question? Great.
Mormon?
Thank you. Appreciate the comparisons. I would suggest, next time that you do the report, you might look north of I-70 and can those, because I think you'll see a different travel comparison with the traffic coming out of Weld County and Larimer 25 and along US 85 and US.
It's definitely great context. Thank you.
Jessica?
Yeah, this is a fantastic culmination of information. This is a fantastic notebook. I love how you did the graphics. The information is really easy to read. And I asked for 20 copies, so I'm hoping you're going to autograph all of them. But no, really, really nice job. I was peeking at it earlier and leaned over and told Ron that just the way the data is presented is really easy to follow. I don't know, maybe it's inaccessible, so maybe that's, but yeah, it's fantastic and really good data. I'm excited to share this with my team, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
Other questions, Ron?
Not so much a question, but I think this really good work leads to a lot of sort of thought exercises and questions, right? And I think you look at that office vacancy rate in the downtown core of Denver and think about the decrease in transit ridership. And so if that persists, do we need to rethink the transit system? Because the transit system right now has been developed over decades to get a lot of workers into downtown Denver, into the central core at peak times and back out at peak times. And if that's not going to continue to be the demand, do we need to rethink how we deploy transit resources around the region and where, and that has huge implications, not just for Denver, but for the whole region. Or will those offices be redeveloped into something else that will drive future transit and transit ridership? So there's big questions around that. The micromobility thing raises huge questions in my head about, are they providing good quality sort of first, last mile access to transit, or are they replacing what used to be walk trips and transit trips? And I think the question is still unanswered. And I think kudos to you, Max, and the team for pulling this all together. I echo, it's really important, but it doesn't stop at just the report. We should all be looking at this and bringing those questions forward, because it can lead us to other research or future research questions that have big implications about how we approach transportation. Thank you again. Oh, and a big announcement for Max. Congratulations. Actually, Max is no longer an assistant planner. He's been promoted to planner, so congratulations, Max.
Thank you.
Yes, Matt Carlson.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Max. Any consideration in terms of how equity is being responded to throughout the entire region? Are they newly developing or emerging travel corridors? Are they characteristics from a mode perspective that would speak to equity, vulnerable populations, underinvested communities, or access to activities of daily living, employment, et cetera?
So I'm not sure I have the full answer for you. So I might invite other members of DRCOG to speak if they will. But what I will note is we did explore using Streetlight which is a data source that uses phone-based data to look at travel trends. We were going to consider land use, and part of the tool does have an equity element where you can sort of filter by demographic. We didn't end up feeling, satisfied with that tool, and didn't want to include that analysis into this presentation just because it didn't really give us anything conclusive. But to more specifically answer your question, I'll turn it over to, I think, Jacob, I saw raised his hand.
Yeah, thank you, Max. Just to add a little bit of color commentary. the congestion work that Max just presented on is kind of agnostic in terms of we're just looking at a lot of data, right? And it's a regional analysis, but it's actually really important for many things, as Ron alluded to, including the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. And there's a little known federal requirement that there's actually a direct linkage between our congestion management program and the Regional Transportation Plan. And we actually need to demonstrate in the RTP, when we get to the point of identifying those project priorities and building the fiscally constrained plan, that there's a basis for those improvements in the congestion management program. So part of what we do is we take the great work that Max and the staff have done on the congestion management side. We're going to overlay that with our equity index, equity analysis, and the other inputs and the work that we do in the Regional Transportation Plan to really take a holistic analysis of kind of what we're learning from these different data sources and building together with all of that, the fiscally constrained plan. So the bottom line is that while there maybe isn't a direct sort of equity lens right here, right now, there definitely will be as part of the Regional Transportation Plan in assembling all this information.
Yes, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks. I guess a quick follow-up to that is any of the trends or data sources inputted into the scenario planning? That's separate.
Yeah, I think it's all related. I think we've seen today, even between Max's presentation, Alvin's presentation, there is a lot of overlap, right, in some of the issues and some of the data. So I think definitely it's one of many inputs for us as we continue to think about scenario planning and forming those scenarios is what we're learning from things like this. So yes.
Thank you, Jacob. Yes, Chris Quinn.
Hi, Chris Quinn with RTD. Max, just for clarity on slide number 9, I think you said it, but I couldn't quite remember. Shared micro-mobility usage, that does not include ride-hailing, it's just scooters and bikes, et cetera?
Yes, just scooters, bikes. This data is from Ride Report for additional context.
Good clarification, thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay. Well, Max, thank you very much for that presentation. I did just want to highlight, I do think one thing we've seen in the region, right, is sort of that, you mentioned, Michelle, right, there's a lot of variation in the days, and I think some of the travel time reliability in the region is something I'm kind of curious just to see, right, as we have congestion, but used to know exactly kind of how long it's going to take. I think there's more variability nowadays I can come down here sometimes in 20 and sometimes in like way, way more than that. So it just kind of varies, right, on different things. So I'm just curious in the region, right, what we start to see and maybe defining congestion a little differently as we think about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We all have our anecdotal stories, right? We all use the transportation system. I carpool in from down south into downtown, and that the day of the week thing is absolutely true. Mondays and Fridays, it's a breeze to get in here. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are terrible. But the other interesting anecdote from my experience is that even on those days, the mornings are generally better. It seems like everyone has more flexibility on when they go to work in the morning, but by golly, when it hits 5, everybody leaves. So the PM peak hour is still as bad as it ever was, but the mornings are quite a bit easier. So a lot of these things, all have our own individual stories.
And then also wanted to just highlight the C470 project and, highlighting that I do think down in the Douglas County area, we've seen a lot of great benefits, right, to a lot of improvements, but that has certainly made a very large difference in the ability to commute safely through the region. So thank you for highlighting that. Of course. All right. Thank you, Max.
Thank you.
So with that, we have no informational items today, which is good because we're very late in the day. And administrative items, do we have any additional member comments or other matters that someone would like to bring up? Yes, Dr. Cog. You tied. I think Ron gets to go first, though.
Sorry. Just some inside baseball organizational news, but kind of it will be important for all of you. Some staffing changes in DRCOG. So as you all should be aware, DRCOG is the recipient in partnership with our local governments around the $200 million EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Act implementation grant So that's going gangbusters. We're staffing up to run that program, and we have just appointed Robert Spots to lead that program for DRCOG. So he's changing roles, which means we're sort of losing him as the program manager for our mobility analytics group, which is the travel modeling and the congestion and the air quality work that we do. But super excited for Robert to take on that new and exciting role on behalf of the region. And so Sang-Gu Lee, who some of you know, who is currently our travel model supervisor, is moving up into that program manager position. So a little bit of inside change in roles at DRCOG, but those are folks that you have interactions with occasionally, or some of you more often than that. So just those changes at DRCOG.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. It has been a really productive year. We have done a lot of work together. I know there have been a lot of long meetings this year, including today. There's just been so much work that we've been involved in together over this past year, and that will continue, frankly, into 2025. But I just want to appreciate your role in helping guide the MPO planning process. The work that you do here with us is critically important to guiding our work, our planning, and our work products. This really is, our sort of embodiment of our MPO planning process and the work that you do here and the advisement that you give us that guides our overall committee process at DRCOG for MPO transportation planning. So we recognize the time that you put in both to come here and be in these meetings and read the packets and ask your good questions. So I just want to appreciate everyone as we look at the end of this year and look forward to next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron and Jacob, and congratulations to Robert. That's a really big deal, so congratulations. So with that, our next meeting will be January 27th. I think it's 2025. Yep, correct. So we will be meeting next time in 2025, and we are now adjourned because Jacob didn't scare us all in the beginning at 3:26 today. Thank you very much.